Soft start here, just a few announcements to pass on. Just a reminder to fill out the evaluation for this presentation. We really like the feedback. We like to get ripped apart. It makes us feel really good about ourselves. So this is not nerve-wracking enough for us. But it is really good feedback for us. We like to know what you think about this. This is a lot of information we're going to present today. Just to give you a little transparency, because we just went through that whole Black Mirror thing and that keynote. It was just, technology being terrifying. But today we're going to try to get through this not too quickly, but enough where we have enough time at the end, because I think there's going to be a lot of questions. A lot of the documents and things we're going to present today, we're going to give you on thumb drives at the end of the session today. And if you want to do any deep dives on any of this stuff, people love, yeah, I told you, free stuff, see?
That's right, free stuff. Very important.
So if you want to deep dive on any of this stuff at the end of the class, just think about questions you want to ask during. We're going to try to leave about 15 or 20 minutes at the end for that kind of stuff, because this is a lot of information to go over, and hopefully we can kind of connect with you on a lot of the challenges that you're experiencing if you're going through a content audit or an accessibility check or anything like that. Okay. All right, and with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everybody. I think we'll start by going around and introducing ourselves, favorite Chipotle burrito and spirit animal. No, we won't do that. Wolf, black bean, okay. Good morning, my name is Chad Menard, and this is? Pellegrin. And we are both senior web administrators with the City and County of Denver. That's just a fancy name we made for ourselves, so we're essentially webmasters, but we like to feel a little special. We've both been with the city for roughly 6 years. I've been there just over 6 years. I think you've been there a little bit longer.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so we kind of finish each other's. Thank you.
Sandwiches.
There we go. And today we're going to talk about building a citywide web accessibility strategy. So I'm just going to read this. What is a web accessibility strategy? A web accessibility strategy is a way for smaller teams within larger organizations, small teams, to help create policies that inform content audits and governance around ensuring an accessible web experience. Accessibility includes, but is not limited to, ADA compliance, Americans with Disability Act, readability, unified user experience and design, and much more. And I think this is really important because when we talk about accessibility, often we only think about alt tags and contrast and things like that. But in Denver, for example, we serve a very large Spanish population, and if we're not serving those people, we're not serving everybody as well. So when we think about accessibility, we try to think of also some of the tenets we heard about earlier, such as inclusivity.
We use equity, digital equity.
Equity is a good term for it. And just to give you a little bit of background, Denvergov.org, the website we work for, underwent a huge transformation from 2013 to 2015, right when I started, which included preparing for a migration to a new content management system. We went from .NET Nuke to Adobe Experience Manager, kind of going from a Yugo to a Cadillac. It was very jarring. Cleaning up and reducing over 12,000 pages to just under 4,500. That was a lot of low-hanging fruit, a lot of ridiculousness on the website that we identified through spreadsheets, a lot of manual processes, and just clearing it out. And removing editor access for hundreds of web content authors, many of whom we had no way of tracking. Our old system, we had a little login on the bottom of the screen near the privacy policy, and we had no way of tracking people coming and going within the city. So I think we had close to 1,000 web authors at any given time, many of whom were probably not even with the city anymore, could just delete giant swaths of content if they were so vindictive. Thankfully, we didn't have anybody that awful. But it was nerve-wracking, to say the least, when I started. I came from an e-commerce background. I'm like, this is ridiculous what we're going through here. What are we doing? Let's lock everyone out. And all of this, it's 3 bullet points, but this took about 2 years to do. This was a very long process just to get everything cleaned up, because we did not want garbage in, garbage out as we moved to the new system. And this is the fruits of our labor. This is Denvergov circa 2013. It's a little hard to see, but this was a very, mid-2000s, late 2000s design. Lots of gradients. If we looked at this website on a phone, it was a lot of pinching and zooming and trying to see what you were doing. It wasn't a very mobile-friendly site, and at that time, the big buzzword was mobile-friendly, responsive design, and that's what we wanted. We didn't want an app, we wanted a system that will give us a mobile-friendly, responsive site, and that's what we got with Adobe Experience Manager, which is a great platform. This is actually a picture screenshot of Denvergov circa 2015 when we launched in September of 2015. Very beautiful site. As a designer, I got to tell my dad, see, I'm using my art degree. And I was very happy with myself. We had the nice big banner that everyone likes to use at the top to kind of showcase our services, one of which was PocketGov. As the screen shrunk into mobile and tablet devices, it would just reflow beautifully. Everything was nice and simple and clean and unified. And as a result of all this, we got accolades. We were just bathing in the sunlight of our, of our accomplishment. So after years of toil and hard work, we had a lean and mean website and the recognition to match. These are just a few of the awards that we won that we applied for them, but we won. We got the Best of the Web in 2016 for the City Portal category, first place. I think before that we were always hitting around 5th or 7th place. That was a huge deal for us. We went out and had mimosas or something. Yeah. And then more recently, we applied for the Adobe Government Creativity Awards winner. And we did win for interactive web design, which was really cool for us. And all this stuff is plastered on my wall next to my pictures of my kids. I just love all this stuff. And it was just a great time. We came, we saw, we conquered. Like most web redesign projects, we were done and we felt great. Because as you know, when you finish a website, you're done. It's like publishing a book, right? So we descended upon Denver. We lost a couple dragons. The last year wasn't as good as the early years, but we were doing pretty good. You can see Karen standing at the top of the stairs. I had just gotten off that dragon. We destroyed most of downtown, but it was great. We hung our banners up, and we were just very happy with ourselves, and we thought nothing was going to stop us. We could just keep improving and improving and improving. We had this new content management system. Authors were under control. But now what? So for a few years after 2015, during our launch, Denvergov.org was humming along peacefully. Jobs were easy, 2 of us, no problem. But new problems were starting to arise. Custom components and templates that were once a godsend became a hellspawn. Adobe Experience Manager out of the box was a great system at the time, but it didn't do quite everything we wanted it to or needed it to. So we had them build us custom photo galleries, buttons, to match our brand standards and appease our guardians and all that. And, at the time it was working very well, but what they had at that time was what was called a classic UI user interface. And the first upgrade we had to do was for the touch UI. So all these customizations that we had put in weren't just a one-to-one swap. We actually had to hire a contracting company to help us upgrade all these components, which was a nightmare.
You basically put 9 fields into our website.
Yes. And as part of all this work, the initial workflows that we were so excited about, one of the big reasons we got Adobe Experience Manager, weren't working properly. And that was part of our network and our security and all that, just not allowing these workflows to work. So while we had better author governance for the content authors on our website, we also didn't have a lot of control over what they were putting up. We weren't able to spot check things as they were going up. And then even with those limited authors, without any good workflows, content was starting to get out of control again. Upgrades, maintenance, and even small bug fixes were suddenly huge hurdles to overcome. Once again, all this customizations, nightmarish, let's get this from classic UI to touch UI. How are we going to do this with 2 people? We don't know. That much stuff. And just when we thought we were getting a handle on things, we did get the upgrade done eventually. DOJ Accessibility Settlement. DOJ, of course, stands for Department of Justice. If no one has heard from them yet, you might in the future. It's very fun. Sorry. Ooh. So in 2016, we learned of a DOJ settlement reached with the City and County of Denver for violating the ADA, American with Disabilities Act. This wasn't just for the website, this was for the city as a whole. This is things like sidewalks not being accessible, government buildings, improperly inclined wheelchair access, things like that. But the website was a part of that. So one day Karen and I went to a meeting with a few of our managers with our ADA director of the city and sat down. And we're sitting in this meeting, the 4 of us, hearing about the settlement, being a little scared, but ultimately thinking, hey, this is going to be easy. Gonna hit that easy button, we're going to put some alt tags on the stuff, make everything high contrast, and we'll be good to go, right? So to say we misunderstood the scope of work that we had to do was an understatement. So the reality started to set in. We started taking inventory of our website, and this is actual file footage of us doing that. We found the truth to be quite overwhelming. As we went through all these boxes of pages and all this other stuff, our eyes got big, our heart rates went up, we started to sweat, and had panic attacks daily. I'm sure many of you have probably done this if you've done any kind of site maps or document inventory. So this is our list that we came up with. In order to meet the DOJ settlement requirements, we were told we would have to meet 100% WCAG 2.0 AA requirements. That just rolls off my tongue anymore. For the following: all public-facing websites and digital experiences, including Denvergov.org, and a large number of external websites that were owned by the city. Things like Parks and Rec had a new web app called ActiveNet that would allow people to sign up for recreation programs and activities, and those were included as well. But for Denvergov alone, our domain, 2 people, what we had gotten down to about 6,500 pages had ballooned to 25,000 pages and over 75,000 assets. Now, some of this stuff was just stuff we had migrated over and just never did anything with, so it could have been published, it could have been not published, we had no idea. And we also had approximately 200 applications hosted on those sites, as well as third-party vendor apps that were owned and linked on those sites. We would also have to add closed captioning to all our videos, so any Vimeo, YouTube, embedded videos, our Denver 8 municipal channel. And on top of all that, we would have to do mandatory ADA training for all of our digital content creators. And these weren't just our web authors, our 100 web authors. These were people that were supplying PDFs to them or any type of content that's going to go up on the website or any of these digital platforms. How are we going to do this and make this all accessible for everybody? And last but not least, manual and automated testing of all new public-facing digital experiences. And additionally, automated and manual testing done annually for all the existing stuff. So anything coming in would have to be spot checked for ADA compliance and everything we had already done. And soon, like I said, we were very overwhelmed. So we started taking stock of our resources, and like most of you, this is our resources, our little MacGyver kit. We have a matchstick, some gum, and a rubber band, essentially. Not very much, but we had to take advantage of these resources the best we can, just like MacGyver. So, the resources available to us when we started. We had plus or minus 100 web authors, depending on turnover and things like that. We had some internal developers and technical teams. We had free tools and plugins, such as the Wave Accessibility Checker, Google Drive to share documents, things of that nature. And we had analytics and other research tools to help us assess the lift. Policies and guidelines were developed from the official sources, so when we talked about accessibility, instead of recreating the wheel and saying this is how you need to do it, we would point directly to the WCAG guidelines to show people how they needed to address these things. And then forums and subject matter experts, materials for reference. Karen works a lot with the NAGW forums as far as accessibility, which is a great resource, and things like that. And then we also kind of went after champions and defenders that can help us have some teeth, because we like to think our work is respected and analyzed and put up on this high pedestal because of these awards we get. Well, we don't have a lot of teeth. I'm not sure if you guys do, but we were able to get some champions and defenders to help back us up on all of this stuff that we were going to have to do, including city attorneys, community leaders, organizations, etc., to say, hey, accessibility is important and this is why it needs to be done. It's not just the web team being mean. It's not just us trying to meet some requirement for legality. This is something we should be doing. And all of these resources took time to find and work with. It really did take a village to make this all happen. But the most important thing we needed was executive buy-in. This is, once again, file footage of us asking for help. And we talk about executive buy-in, we're of course talking about money for resources. So when the Department of Justice knocks, people tend to listen, but we still needed support and understanding from our leadership. Managers understood what we had to deal with, but director level type people weren't quite on board just yet. So we took a lot of our analytics and metrics and presented to directors and managers to show the tremendous scope of the issue. And once they saw that, it put a little fire underneath them as well. By doing this, we could estimate time and resources needed, and that would help address applications and websites separately, while still collaborating between the appropriate teams. And when we say that, we talk about being webmasters. We can't do everything. We have teams that handle security. We have teams that handle domain redirects, vanity URLs, all of those things that we don't touch on a daily basis. When we make these updates, how do we ensure these teams are involved early and often to make all these things run seamlessly? And then identifying tools, seeing expensive stuff, things that cost more than a Wave plugin, that you really need to, that you have to beg and hope you get. And during this whole process, the most important part for us was standing our ground. Because as you know, people love change. When you come at them and say, hey, guess what? We're going to go do an entire audit of your site. We're going to make it ADA accessible. We're going to get rid of your About Us page because no one cares about that. They love that. But in case that's not true, here's some tips to help you along with this. Make sure you have a strong team to back you. Of course, you're always going to have each other and then people you talk to on forums and things like that. But if you have buy-in from executives and directors and things of that nature, it's really going to help you have some teeth moving forward. You need to establish your process and your guidelines early on. so that you always have something to point to. Remember that as you learn more, these process and guidelines may change. Don't be so rigid with yourself that you don't recognize when something's not working correctly, but never move backward on the same token. You should always have a stepping stone that you're leaning on to move forward and make things better, make things tighter as you move forward.
We learned that one the hard way.
Oh, yeah, and we're still learning this. Then you need to engage the primary stakeholders at every level of your plan to ensure that the decision makers are present and understand the how and why of what is going on. And we talk about primary stakeholders, we talk about how we work with agencies, police department, mayor's office, all these people. Karen and I are lucky enough to be part of the marketing and media team underneath technology services. And once a month we have a PIO, Public Information Officer Communication Marketing meeting. So these people work directly with a lot of these agencies that we were going to have touch points with, and we would just bogart the entire first part of that presentation. Be like, hey, here's what's coming, no surprises when we come knocking on your door to do these audits and these accessibility checks. This is what's coming, it's in writing, we're sending out notifications. Use your internal communications tools, anything you need to do to get the word out to other agencies, not just your own. And then if all else fails, just point to the ceiling and say, Department of Justice, over and over again, because ultimately, that's what will scare people in order to move forward with your plan. And in order to really get going on our plan, we really needed to start to do an accessibility strategy blueprint. So we've got our resources in place. Now, how do we move forward with a citywide accessibility plan? Because everything that's going to be included in this includes things like addressing the scope of work, which you do early on with analytics, identifying the resources that can be leveraged. Once again, most of us are very small teams. How do you leverage every resource possible within the city to help you along this, because you cannot do this on your own? Establishing your support and buy-in, creating policies and guidelines, deploying a content audit, which we're going to deep dive on in a little bit here, and then of course training, follow-up, and governance. If you're putting the toothpaste back into the tube but the other end is still open, it doesn't matter. You can do all the content cleanup and ADA cleanup you want, but if you move on and people just start going back to old habits, it's not going to help you. And it makes it even more frustrating, makes you want to move on to go be a real estate person and have fun at that other presentation over there. So, developing the plan. All these resources are in place. We have a bit of a blueprint going. Step 1A should make your own work environment very fun, or as fun as possible for government. We mentioned earlier that we kind of work in the basement of the City and County Building of Denver, which is a pretty nice area, actually. They gave us our little own hallway with a green wall. It was very important to have a green wall in there. And we call it the web cave, lovingly. We go downstairs. I wish we had fire poles, but that's coming later. Step 1A is to make your workplace fun and strategic, because you're going to be doing a lot of work on this as you get into it. So, for example, it's kind of hard to see in this image here, but this is our office. We've got some nice desks that can be adjusted up and down. These are stand-up desks, which is really nice. We have puzzles for little brain breaks, because as you're working with spreadsheets and everything all day, it gets very mind-numbing. I don't know about you, but I did not get into this work to be not creative. But sometimes it calls for it. So if you can have anything like a puzzle or something, and then we glue these together and hang them up on our wall when we're done. These are like very appropriate for the office. Yeah, exactly. And then of course just we're very digital people, but sometimes it's nice to have analog reminders of what's going on. So that very last picture there is actually a large master calendar with smaller calendars next to it. And that just gives us key dates like when we're out of town or when we have technology freezes. Really important stuff to kind of keep you on track and always have a reminder up on the wall. That's not just an Outlook calendar of what you're doing and what you're accomplishing. This is also great when your boss walks by. You can just point right to, hey, look at that. Got lots of green up there.
And we do have another whiteboard that has all our status on there.
Exactly.
How many pages we've gotten rid of, assets, you name it, we've got it out there.
So after you've kind of established a nice workplace and you're comfortable and the initial resources and buy-in have been established, it's time to begin developing a plan and executing the accessibility strategy. So it's a great thing that there's plenty of ADA content audit and remediation resources for government websites out there, right? No. You can find content audits for SEO, for e-commerce, but for specifically covering the width and breadth of everything that is a content audit, that includes broken links, accessibility factors, readability, all these things that we're trying to take into account. There's not a lot out there, so we're going to present at the end of this class today some of the resources that we've developed for this, and hopefully they help. Because as you know, the Scroll of Truth says, free content audit templates don't exist for what you need. You really need to start with an attack strategy. So, going back to our numbers, 112 portals, over 25,000 pages, 75,000 assets, including images and documents, and over 50 departments and agencies to work with. Where do we start? Step one, always, communications. Getting out in front of the audit to warn, give notice about when and where and how it affects everything. Documentation. Begin fleshing out your documents for the content audit. These include things like a communication plan, process documents, strategy guidelines, tracking sheets, etc. Prioritize your work by doing a level of effort matrix, an LOE exercise. These are very helpful. We honestly just did like a 4-quadrant thing on our board and just started putting agencies up in different quadrants. Low effort, high value, low effort. You know, how do you attack these things? Because you need an objective measure, because people will come up to you when they hear about you doing a content audit. When's my turn? When am I getting it? I should be going first. We're the mayor. Well, we're Department of Revenue. You know, we don't care. We're going to do what's easiest first with the highest reward. And then we're, you know, if you're low effort, low reward, you're going to go to the bottom of the list. And then kind of start with your own house. Knock out the quick wins. Small portals, or what we call portals websites, with little or no assets, and portals that your web team manages themselves, what you manage. So for Denvergov, we are kind of in control of our home page on our main landing pages, like the government, the online services. If you go into these people without cleaning up your own stuff first, they're just going to laugh in your face and say, well, your stuff is not compliant. What are you doing? And this also gives you a chance to work through any process that you develop on your own team and kind of troubleshoot where you're getting kinks, where you're, you know, it's like gap analysis very early on, which is nice. And this kind of takes us to the content audit process itself. And for that, Karen's going to take over.
So hello, and the reason I'm taking over is because in the beginning of all this, I got another job in the city, and that was the Digital Web Accessibility Coordinator. Surprise, you have been voluntold. So with that, I had to create this content audit process. So we had 3 people at the time. We started with 2 people. We had another person for a little while. She was great at documenting process, and she helped us kind of write down what our process was. And that included a lot of what Chad was talking about before with communicating to agencies and leaders, prioritizing the audit efforts for all of the portals, which we had 114 portals, I believe. Yeah, we initially had 114 portals, so every agency or department has their own portal or section of the website. And then we had to identify the content and accessibility issues as part of this process, make recommendations for the remediation of that content, provide a plan for the remediation, set training for the authors, and maintain the governance and standards moving forward after that audit for that portal was done. So, a little more detail about the communication. We would start by sending out a notification of the audit and what to expect. So when we were documenting all of this strategy, we have all these different communications, and it kicked off for the entire city with this initial communication. But then for each agency that had a portal or set of portals, we would send them a communication telling them, hey, we're going to do this, get approval from them, and move forward. Once we got that approval, we would do the research and analysis, which is initially identifying everything going on in their portal. Then we would evaluate and score it. So there was a lot of evaluation points in there, and then we would score it, you know, great, good, okay, terrible. Those aren't the exact, but you get the idea. And then we would create a scope of work, and it was a full document detailing everything that we evaluated and scored. Then we would set up a review meeting with the agency to talk about this stuff and come up with a plan and an agreement on who was going to do what. Then we would move forward with the detailed audit and remediation, which is really getting all the work done at that point. And then once all of that work was done, we'd have a review of that content, that audit of the portal, and then steps for maintaining it, and then following up later on with how well are you doing? Are you keeping it up and staying in line and, you know, cracking the whip? So to start, the communication with agency. So the communication with agency, we started with a bunch of templates because we wanted to stay consistent with our messaging. So anytime we communicated with an agency or the technology services department or all of the marketing people throughout the city, we needed something to keep us consistent in that messaging. So we came up with a number of templates at the beginning of this communication plan, bless you. We had what our mission and our key issues, our talking points, and the tactics and deliverables for this whole audit process project, and what we were doing to get us accessible. And so these templates included the kickoff. The audit has been assigned to an auditor, which is one of us, or occasionally we have a third person, and they're the ones who kind of start the process for a portal audit. We had a launch email to the agency letting them know, hey, we're going to do this for your portal. They could come back to us and say, well, we're not ready yet because it's the elections division and there's about to be an election, so we can't do this right now. And so we would send an email back to them saying, okay, we're good with that. We're going to put you at the end of the list of your section. We'll get back to you. We had the review meeting templates and the follow-up after the review meetings, the email congratulating them, hey, your audit's complete, you're 100% compliant. We had emails to our 311 people so that they were informed of what had changed on the website, so when they get calls, they actually know where things are. And then we always kind of cheered both ourselves and the agency for completing this effort to our technology services people as part of our quarterly announcements. So once we did the communication with the agency saying that we're going to do an audit, it kicks off, if they approve, yes, I want to move forward with the audit, our efforts to do the research and analysis of that portal. And we use a number of tools, as you can see here. We're using the WAVE tool, also the Web AIM contrast checker. This little guy right here is called Spectrum. So we've actually pushed our accessibility a little bit further. We decided early on, you know, we should really push for equity. We should try and reach as many people as we can in the best and simplest and cleanest way we can, because these are our residents, business and resident people. So that is color contrast for different forms of color blindness. We also did, so I found this Elsevier. I don't know if anyone else has used this, but their accessibility checklist is fantastic. It's also free, and I have links for all of that kind of stuff. But we used all of these free tools, including some other Chrome plugins, to get us going and doing all of this research and analysis to identify all the problems going on. So once we got started with that, we had tools that we had built out to do all of this. We used Google Drive, and we developed a content audit template tracking sheet in Google that is just column by column. What's the page URL? You know, what's all this information? All the accessibility issues? Are there color contrast issues? Are you using the headings in the proper order? And it's just kind of a yes/no with some notes depending on what the column is in the tracking sheet. And so we're going through all of this analysis, and we also created tabs to identify all the documents, all the images, any of the other weird things, embedded forms, video, you name it. So we do this, and we create a folder for each portal in Google Drive to put all of our documentation, including this tracking sheet. So we have this tracking sheet there. Once we've done the initial research and analysis, we move to evaluation and score. So you can see in this tracking sheet, it's a little hard to see here, but it's green or red highlight of the...
I'll Vanna White this.
Yeah, please, thank you. Green or red for identifying the different kind of sections. Basically, it's page by page. Green, we've identified, yes, we believe we should keep this page. Red, we believe we should get rid of it. It's not a value. We have a couple of other colors that we use, yellow to merge pages and blue to move a page or content to an internal environment, because there's a lot of stuff on our website, like for human resources, that you absolutely don't need for your public. Your public does not care and does not need to hear or see that. So we use this tracking sheet to identify all of that. And this is our initial identification before we bring all this to the agency to tell them what we've seen, identified, and what our recommendations are going to be. So then, after we've identified everything, we come up with what's called a scope of work document. This is another template that we created, and it just gives a lot of high-level key findings, an overview statement of, here's what we found, we think this is a pretty good website, but you have a few issues here, and you should probably merge this section or get rid of this section. Here's, you know, what your total pages were. You started out with 184 pages. Actually, we had Animal Shelter had 720 something pages, and we ended up with 84 pages when we were done, so it was fantastic. But this kind of identifies all of those things, including word count average per page, the readability. We started doing readability because the average reading level for the United States is sadly 7th to 9th grade reading level. But that's what we're targeting our content for now. So we have some tools to identify that as well. So once we've gotten this scope of work, we have this review meeting with the agency, and we go through all of this information and those high-level findings, and then we have recommendations on that scope of work of what we should do. For instance, we have, this is the existing site map, and this is what we think your site map should be. So once we talk through all that, at the end of this meeting, we go through, okay, here's what we would like you to do, and here's what we're going to do. And most of the time, it's we're going to clean up your actual pages for things like headers and alt tags and whatnot, but you're going to go back into the page properties of those pages and do all of your metadata because you're the subject matter expert. Oh, and here's some tools to tell you how to do metadata properly, because we also give them what's called a quick reference sheet that gives them some high-level tools to use to check their content, how to do the metadata, and name their page titles and everything. So we give them the tools to work with, and we say, okay, you've agreed to go take these tasks, and usually it's the metadata work and cleaning up the remediation of their documents and images, and we have guidelines for that we give them, and then we clean up everything else. And we sign off of it, saying, yes, we agree to this. We also put a timeline in there to say, you're going to do this by this time, we're going to do this by this time. And we work simultaneously and give them access to the Google Drive folder with all of those tools in there. And there's a subfolder in there that's the working documents. It has all of the analytics, the scope of work, the quick reference guide, and the tracking sheet. And we take that tracking sheet, we copy it and give it to them with our recommendations. And then they go back. See, here's the quick reference guide. And it has all these resources and tutorials and links to do things like how do I remediate a Word document or a PowerPoint or Excel or whatever you've got. And then this is where, so I know the colors are hard to see. This is light green. These are the ones that we marked as what we think they should keep. They've actually marked these dark green because they've already gone through, made the decision to remediate that content. The whole page has been completely remediated, and they mark it darker green saying, I am keeping this, and it's completely remediated. But we work in tandem on that stuff. So if they see a red one that's light red and they've decided to get rid of it, they don't have to do any remediation. They just mark it red. I agree. Let's get rid of it. Once they've marked it red, we will go back and delete those pages for them. So this whole process is allowing us to share these documents, work with them in tandem to get all this content cleaned up, and we've shown them how to do it. So once all of that is done, and the auditor, usually Chad, or sometimes another person, they have completed the audit, they're working with the agency, they're the primary contact with that agency for that specific audit. I'm there to be support as the Web Accessibility Coordinator. But when he says, it's done, we're good, it comes back to me and I have to check everything else on the site. I go page by page and I check the accessibility of everything in that cleaned up portal, and if it's good, I sign off of it. So that's me, Web Accessibility Coordinator, the big ogre. I'm less of an ogre now because people have kind of come on board. They understand it more, they're supportive of it. It's actually interesting. At first we were really scared, they were really scared. Once we got through this process, they were actually really excited. Oh, I don't have to manage all this junk. And my site hasn't blown up into something that is a behemoth. And so they're very pleased about it. And so, you know, I'm working with them and with Chad. And then the other thing that I do as the accessibility coordinator for the city is I do training, which we require our authors now to do. I think that's highly important. If you don't do that, or if you don't have that situation and you need it, do it. I highly recommend it. So I train the authors on accessibility, including document remediation, which is probably the biggest part of that training. I also work with vendors, our internal dev team, to tell them what they need to do for accessibility and what the requirements are, including that manual and automated testing. And I also work with the attorneys, and Chad mentioned earlier, we have a city disability director, and she does all accessibility, including the physical stuff. So I'm there to review this. I'm also there as support and for training. And then after the audit is done, it's been signed off, it's good, we have to continue to keep reviewing it. And that is a matter of have the authors been trained if they're going to stay an author, which we've also managed to get rid of some authors because we don't. There's some authors out there, if you have a license that's $400 per author, it's crazy if they're only authoring content once a month or less. We want them at least doing it once a week, more if possible, and we're going to keep dwindling down those authors until we have a good core group because they also are more engaged and more knowledgeable. So as part of this, and to make sure our work doesn't go to waste, we do this training. It's mandatory. We check off, yes, you've done the training. We go back and review it, and we give them either, well, usually we do a 6-month and a 12-month review of their site. We pull analytics. We now have some more robust tools than what we started with in the beginning, so we can also pull reports for accessibility, and we meet back with the agency and say, okay, here's how you're doing. And that's the kind of follow-up, and over time, when we get to the next stage of our content management system, we are always working on this, so we're going to continue adding workflows, reducing authors, making sure that the work that we've been doing for this audit sustains. But as part of all this training, which is kind of at the beginning and the end, it's interesting. In the beginning, we have to train ourselves because when you're told you're the accessibility coordinator, you're like, okay, I'm excited, I believe in that from a kind of ethical standpoint, but I have, yeah, go team, exactly. I have no idea what I'm doing. So Chad and I had to do a lot of training. He mentioned earlier I went on a lot of forums. I talked to a lot of people in the community. There's a great group in Colorado. It's the Blind Institute of Technology. Mike Hess is the founder of it, and he has been infinitely helpful. If you can find people in the community to talk to, I highly recommend it. So that was part of, you know, this training, learning the accessibility, keeping up to date on the accessibility. It keeps changing like technology does all the time. Now we've got WCAG-EM. That's a methodology for testing now, and I didn't know that until recently. But again, not learning in a vacuum and talking to people in forums. I'm also on Twitter, and I'm always bugging the Ally Project people. I'm sure they're tired of me now. And engaging with those experts like the Blind Institute of Technology. Going on the NAGW forums, you guys have a lot of questions, and they're really great questions, and we should use the forum so much more. I get the feed in my Gmail, and people have great questions, and you have great knowledge, so share. And then the last thing was creating these processes and policies. We made it mandatory to have both the author training and accessibility training before you get to be an author, not afterwards. And they have to do it every year. So.
Or else.
I know, we're cracking the whip again. But that really helps. So it really helps though, but then also having guidelines, we created documents. So we use Microsoft Teams. I don't know if you use similar products, but now we've created a Teams group for our web team that includes a channel for accessibility. Anyone can ask questions. We post our accessibility guidelines up there. We created a guide that kind of, so the problem with WCAG is it's so big and robust and it's highly technical, but most of your people who are putting content on your site have no idea. They don't care. They're not going to know about JavaScript and event handlers. I mean, I know that, but you know, the 100+ authors don't know that, or even the content creators in the city. So I created this guide to, I hate to say it, kind of dumb it down, but I did. It dumbed it down. It made it more visual and simpler and said, this is exactly how heading hierarchy works. This is exactly how color contrast works. Here's the tool you can use to check it. And so I simplified it. I think it's like 45 pages, but you know, it's indexed. You can jump right to the section. It's on Teams. Anyone can get to it. And we've already gotten great feedback from our authors saying, oh yeah, it's on Teams. And that totally helped me out. So I highly recommend that. But then we also created stricter brand and web standard guidelines to simplify. We had all these different colors for buttons and styles. We still have it right now, but we're about to get rid of a bunch of those colors because it looks like Rainbow Bright. It's nice from one standpoint, but if you're talking about government where you're meeting the needs of a very large audience with a diverse capability, keep it simple. I mean, use the KISS method. You know what the KISS method is? Yeah. So use the KISS method and simplify to, let's face it, blue. I know people get bored of it, but it's used because it is the most attainable color you can use on the web. It's best for the eyes, that dark blue and navy, or even, we use the dark and the medium blue a lot. It's so easy to read. Make sure you're using large enough fonts, that your icons are large enough to really identify and keep them simple. I actually don't like the outline icons. They're harder for a lot of people to read. I use the solid icons. So just keep all of these simple, and then I put these all into the standards and guidelines to make everything a consistent user experience, a resident experience that people know and trust, and then make sure that every page and every application follows that. So that's what I did for the guidelines. Chad and I did, it was a team effort. We're always a team. If you haven't heard yet, we go by Charon. So providing website follow-up, we actually, those calendars that he was talking about, one of the things we have is the audit calendar, and we mark those follow-ups for a visual, not only in our Outlook, but those visual calendars to say, okay, the clerk and recorder is going to be ready for a review. Let's go take a peek at their site.
It's like your dad coming in after you said you cleaned your room.
Yeah, we're going to go check under the bed and in the closet, exactly. So we go to those follow-up meetings with follow-up analytics, basically kind of a shortened version of a scope of work. We actually have another template. We've made lots of templates. And so we can go in consistently with just clear information and tasks. So this is where you were when you finished the audit. This is where you are now. If there are any issues, we address it and how you can fix it. And if not, congratulations, good job. And then again, that training follow-up for the agencies, we just make sure that our content, we do a number of trainings now, but before we were getting killed by one-off trainings. We, every time somebody wanted to be trained or get a refresher, they would call us and just schedule a one-off training. There's no time for that. I mean, who has time for that? So what we've done now is every second Wednesday of the month, we have new author training. Every third Wednesday of the month, we do
that's Open Lab.
That's Open Lab. So we do an Open Lab. All of these trainings are about 2 hours. Open Lab is just, it's like, you know, your professor's open hours, office hours. So sometimes we'll cover a subject. People are sometimes asking for, you know, I'd really like to learn more about Photoshop so that I can format my photos better. We'll do a little short training on that and then have the rest of the time for people to ask questions. And I'll tell you, it might not be a lot of people, but even the 5 or 6 people who show up have really good questions and learn so much, and they do become better authors. And it also shows us kind of, on the backside, who is really engaged and worth being an author. I know that kind of sounds terrible, but when you have people who are engaged, it allows us to say, you know what, they are really doing content consistently, and they're learning and sustaining the policies and guidelines and work that we'd like them to do. So we do that, and then the fourth Wednesday, I do my accessibility training. I think that's it, right? Yeah. So I do my accessibility training. That's also 2 hours, and that one's always full. And the most satisfying thing about that, which was surprising to me, is everyone came in terrified. And when we ended the sessions, it was surprising that they said, you know, I feel so much better. I thought this was going to be absolutely horrible and I was going to die, but I actually understand a lot more about that training. And so we do that every month now. It has saved us so much time of our own time, and it's helped so many people because the messaging is consistent, the training is consistent, we have a cadence. So I highly recommend that. So the lessons learned in all of this process, which I would say sort of took us 2 years, but we really didn't hit the blocks, you know, running until the beginning of this year. Yeah, like April. So it was about a 6-month process to really get the strategy documents and all the other templates down. But the first thing was, it's not going to be perfect the first time. That's why we did our stuff first. Every time we do an audit, we try to do a burn down after the audit of what worked, what didn't work, what we can change, and we tweak our process a little bit accordingly. And again, that's that low-hanging fruit. That's where you learn those lessons. So the burn down is what we do next. Be flexible, like undergarments on a hot day, adjust, adjust, adjust. And so just make sure that if you find, like I've changed the tracking sheet, I can't even tell you how many times.
Every time we go through it, we're like, why are we doing this? This takes 5 minutes per thing, and it's not helping anybody.
Exactly. We've discovered so much. And then give yourself a break. So back to the puzzle picture. Don't just absorb yourself into this audit because you will drive yourself insane. Step away. Do something creative. Sometimes Chad and I do animated banners for the home page because it's fun. Chad did this really cool one of the Sports Authority field with the lights and fireworks going, and you know, it's just a way to step away. We also like to take lunch walks and walk downtown because you just have to get away. And then again, connect with others, reach out to others in the cities that you know, all of you here. We've talked to Boston and Louisville and Seattle and a whole number of cities to figure out, are you doing accessibility efforts? What are you doing? What is your team makeup? Who's doing what? We're a team of 2 and we keep going to our managers. These people have 7 team members.
Boston
or
has 20.
Yeah, Boston has 20. I was like, that is so unfair.
They got the Super Bowls and they got 10.
I know, it's so unfair. But it does help us talk to our managers better about all of these issues. It makes our team better. It makes our accessibility efforts better. So moving forward, we're going to perform yearly audits, but they're probably going to be a lot simpler because we're doing, actually continuing to do all of the nasty work, all of the really heavy stuff, getting rid of these 25,000 pages of
Knocked down
junk.
13,000 already, though.
Yeah. We've knocked down 13,000. I'm pretty happy about that. And getting rid of all sorts of documents. You know, we had news on our site. So our mayor just got his 3rd term. He's been in the office for 8 years, and we had news from our former mayor, who was governor then, Hickenlooper. Do you know who Hickenlooper is? Yeah. So he was our mayor before he was governor, and now he's trying to run for president and then backed out of that. We still had news from that. Who cares? Why are you keeping that on your website? I will tell you, just one newsroom, we got rid of like 400 pages. It was crazy. So performing the yearly audits will keep us kind of ahead of this, and then maintaining the standards and guidelines. If we make any changes, making sure that our authors know about it, making sure everything is consistent on the site with those standards and guidelines. Continuing with our regularly scheduled training every month. Everyone's been attending. We haven't had any attendance drop. The only attendance drop we've had is the new author training, and I'm not upset about that because with less authors and more authors who are consistently trained, you don't need as much training, but we're still there for it just in case they need it. Keeping the stakeholders and leadership engaged, and a lot of that is part of the communications plan that we have. So one of the templates is to communicate to our department and the directors on what we've accomplished so far. We just got rid of 13,000 pages or whatever. And then budget for better monitoring and testing tools. If you don't have it now, try and plan for it as soon as you can, if you can. Keep your system upgraded and up to date. This is the one we're paying for right now.
Always.
Always, but we're going to get there. We actually have a plan to get to the AEM version that is all out-of-the-box functionality. Stop customizing. Then develop the technology intake process. This is actually really important. It's one of the last things. Now that you've gotten all this accessibility stuff done, anytime your technology department or whoever handles any of the applications, websites, custom sites that you have, add an accessibility portion as part of the intake process so that before you've paid and implemented that stuff, you've made sure this is going to be accessible and it's going to follow our guidelines. You guys have to make sure it's accessible. It has to be tested, automated, and manually before it launches. Really important. Get yearly and manually automated testing scheduled early so you can plan for it, both from a timing and resource aspect, but from a budget aspect. And then assign a digital accessibility coordinator, because we're cool and we will keep you sane. So that is about it, and thank you very much. And now, if you have questions, let us have it.
Could you talk a little bit about document remediation, what it was and what it moved to?
So in the beginning, and we're still kind of doing this, we're starting to move to more tools to help us. Document remediation was, we asked the agencies as part of that scope of work for their step, they had to go and we basically zipped up their whole assets folder for their documents, and we put it on the Google Drive as a zipped folder, and they go through every single document, and they use the Adobe Acrobat tool to test PDFs. So Adobe Acrobat DC accessibility tool, and we had them do that. And any issues that they had, what we recommended is please try and get the original document that's in Word, PowerPoint, or whatever, remediate it there. And I trained people how to remediate in those programs. Get that document remediated, export it as a PDF, do a final check in Acrobat DC, because sometimes it misses things like the title, which is super annoying. I don't know. I put a title in and it does it anyway. But if you do that final check, once you're good with that, they upload it back to the site, and that's for the ones that they're keeping. Because the rest of it is, if they mark it red, they don't have to do anything. They just don't upload it to the site, and they just say, I'm not keeping it. But for the ones they keep, then they mark it dark green on their sheet, and they're good to go. So
And a big step before that is making sure that they need that document. A lot of times people are like, well, Linda wants to access that quickly from her desktop. You know, we don't need that. We would provide them analytics and say, here's, 100 people hit this a year. Is that worth it? Or can that be an email?
We kind of lectured people a little.
Yeah, we tried.
But you had to, in a very helpful sort of way. I mean, it seems like lecturing at first and more on my side that I feel like I'm lecturing them, but it's really training them and explaining to them, you're not getting a lot of value for this. Here are the analytics showing that only 24 people an entire year clicked on this. Can you just make it a phone call? Or can you put a statement on your site telling them if you need additional information or additional documentation, please contact us.
We hear the word legal requirement a lot. This is a legal, I'm like, we're not hiding the information.
We got mean about that one too.
Yeah.
We told them, okay, if it's a legal requirement, I want to see it. You send it to me in an email of what the exact requirement for it is.
The statute, yeah.
And I'll tell you, we have busted so many people with that. And it's funny because when they have to go through that exercise, they suddenly are like, this is too much of an effort. And they'll email us back going, no, we've decided we didn't need it. And Chad and I are like, well, see, I told you so. But that's kind of how that worked.
Yeah. Is there a learning curve for creating accessible PDFs?
There is, but it was actually surprising. Not for me, it was because I needed to know the details of it. But once I was able to know the details, get a lot of practice in, which I did through this audit. Because in the beginning, I was doing the remediation and going through and testing it again and trying to just banging my head against the desk. Why isn't this working? And doing more research, going online, forums, that was part of the research thing. There's so much research that I did. But it allowed me to front load these efforts to just be able to say, now I know this and I can train you on it. And so I was able to then more easily train all of these content creators.
You spoke early on about the Department of Justice ruling, and what are the implications for third-party software that's deployed and linked from your website? How did you work with vendors, and where did your responsibilities stop?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, and that was based on the settlement itself, because you don't get real rules other than you need to be accessible until the DOJ actually comes after you, and you have to make a settlement. So the settlement for us was specific, because the regular rule is not, because now we have 2.1. So the specific WCAG level 2.0, level 2A, plus the automated and manual testing for all public-facing digital experiences where the city is paying for some portion of that tool, service, application, whatever it is. And so me as the accessibility coordinator, I got my marching orders from the disability director. And sometimes if it's iffy, I talk to her. And also having that city attorney, which I highly recommend, get your law on your side. Having us have conversations of, okay, well, this agency has this website. They're getting funding from us, but they're of a 501(c)(3). And so most of their money is coming from there. But the site is being run by all city resources. putting their employees to just totally manage the site, it means we own the site. So that's how it came to us. It's different for different settlements, but generally from what I've heard and seen, it kind of works the same way. So most of the time, if the funding is coming from the city, then yes, it has to be accessible, and it's only for public facing, although I highly recommend if you can make internal accessible, please do. The other thing that caught us up, which we're kind of in a fight on, are elected officials. Elected officials are autonomous. I see some nodding heads here. It's a pain point. We inspire them and tell them this is going to be easier. Also, we push the metrics on them and say, look, Denvergov has way more SEO than you have. So if you're going to put it on your site, you're going to come down here. If you put it on ours, you're going to go up here. We've gotten some fighting. Sometimes we don't on that one, on the elected officials. But for everything else, it has, if we find it and the agency got it without telling us, we go back to them, we review it and say it's not accessible, and if you don't make it accessible within this amount of time, we are authorized to block it from our network. We got mean. But we got
mean for us.
At the last resort. You know, our goal is really to be as helpful as possible, and most of the time, we have project managers for our vendor applications and our technology services department to help us with those vendors, to get in contact with those vendors and have discussions. You need to be accessible. We are required. Sometimes we have to make financial deals because they had a contract before these requirements, and so we kind of have to negotiate that. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't. A lot of times we say, our contract states that you will also abide by all state, local, state, and federally mandated guidelines or requirements, laws and requirements or whatever it is. And that is enough for us to say, hey, it says you will abide by all federal. That is including ADA, so you do have to do this. I'd say 85% of the time they agree and they pay for it and do the work themselves. Sometimes we just negotiate, we'll pay for part of it, you need to do this moving forward. It just depends on the vendor.
Question on the sort of like content audit and things like that. You mentioned how it doesn't let you have really old news articles. Do you have guidelines around what archive content?
Do now.
Yeah, we put it inside we have a content policy now. It's not arbitrary, but we decided plus or minus 2 years. So we go back to 2018 right now.
Journalistic standards.
Journalistic standards, yeah.
Yeah, so we went and did a little research and we realized that 2 was the standard. And we did 1 year calendar, or is it calendar year or year to date for the calendar?
Yeah,
Yeah, year to date?
and that's totally up to them.
Yeah, so we said 1 year to date for events and 2 years for news.
And your legal team was fine from a player perspective?
Yeah, they were totally fine with it because in Colorado we have Cora, and a lot of other states have records retention policies or whatever, and so we don't have to keep it on our site. We just have to have it available somehow. And so on every page of our site, we've got the Cora statement down there, and we just handle it that way.
We get a lot of feedback on news articles, and we're taking them and mucking up search results on the
Yeah.
Is there, and then we play around with that, but you pull one lever and then everything blows up. Do you have any guidance around that at all?
Chad? This is his pain point. No, he's been working on it.
Yeah, and the problem, we have that same problem too. Our internal search engine is not as good as Google, and news articles tend to pull in a lot of keywords, and especially with their titles. And another important piece of metadata that they pull in are dates, because usually you have a lot of dates in articles like that. So with our new standard, where we're going back a couple of years on publishing first and then deleting things, that seems to be helping a lot. There's not much you can do to really counteract that, because of the nature of search engine optimization that's looking for those things. Like, we don't put any metadata on news articles usually, but it's pulling those first paragraphs, and it's just an issue. I wish I had a better answer.
404 page, by the way. I know that's a weird little thing. It's a marketing thing in a way too, but making a good Oops 404 page and making sure that the pages that might show up in a Google search, I mean, you can actually make it a little bit engaging and even say, this is not available anymore, but if you want to see more of Denvergov or whatever your website is, jump them back to another space in their homepage, like the search or whatever you want to do. It does kind of mitigate it a little bit, but again, unpublishing and then deleting the documents for us, because each of our news articles is considered a page. And I know a lot of systems do that. That completely eliminates it, so you won't get it just kind of hovering in the ether.
And if you don't have a way to automatically kind of archive things, like we have an automatic archive on ours that kind of disappears the link, because how Google is working is it's spidering. If it can spider to it, it's going to show it up in the search engine. So if you want to archive something manually, you can just kind of make an archive page that's still accessible with a direct link, but that's not accessible from the top level of your page as it spiders down. And you can hide content like that if it still needs to be up there, but that way it's more of an archived type page that's still accessible but not easily accessible by Google. You can also talk to your developers to putting in like a no spider command on those pages after a certain time. There's other options. They're kind of manual though.
We've been testing a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, that was a great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm curious, all the kind of accessibility that you've implemented, do you have metrics as far as it's actually being used? Like, is there anything in Google Analytics that says, okay, this page is being hit by a screen reader, or anything like that?
So, I'd love to see one that actually told us if it was being hit by a screen reader. I haven't really seen that yet. Now, we did finally, after 2 years of me trying, we got Site Improve. That's actually been hugely successful for us in showing what each page's status on accessibility is, overall site accessibility is. It does a lot of things like that. I also use, in the web developer tools on Chrome, you can use Lighthouse, and that allows you to see performance, SEO, accessibility, stuff like that. So we kind of do the analysis ourselves based on Google Analytics, Site Improve.
But we don't have anything specific. It would be great, like how you can see the browsers down to like the level, like IE9. Who's doing that? Like if you saw like a JAWS screen reader hit you, that would be really
I
interesting.
would love to see that. In fact,
But we don't have access
you
to
put an
that.
idea in my brain, I'm going to have to do a little more research on that, because that's really interesting. We're only seeing it from what is accessible, not people using assistive technology.
We're just assuming, and it's a horrible thing to do, but if we're hitting all this accessibility markers and making it accessible, that it doesn't matter if they're coming there with it or not. So.
And I just want to note, please don't judge our site yet, because we're still in the process.
Don't dive too deep.
Yes, don't dive- exactly.
You kind of answered my question just now. I was going to ask you why you used all the free tools versus paying for something like Site Improve.
Because we're poor.
It was that buy-in early on. Like I said, in the initial meetings, we would sit there with our manager. We're like, we'll get this done in 2 weeks. We'll site map it. We'll just go find all the images, alt tag them, bingo, bango. Yeah.
Well, and that's why we created all these templates, because we were just spinning our wheels with all this manual testing and these free tools. It was very time consuming.
So it's DOJ approval?
They
or
have
Site
to approve,
reports?
so they have to approve all our tools too. We had to tell them what tools we were going to use.
What trainings we were gonna,
We have to
yeah.
hit certain benchmarks. Actually, when I get back from this conference next week, I have to meet with the attorney and our disability director and my director to talk about what we've done and what our roadmap is moving forward, which is always a scary meeting, because we're trying really hard, but it's hard to also explain, as you say, there's such a huge manual effort. Even with these tools, Site Improve can tell you a lot of information, but then you still have to go fix it. Any tool in the world, and manual testing too, they're telling you what the problems are, but you still have to take the time to fix it.
But they approved.
They did
Site
approve, they approved Site Improve. They actually approved a number of tools. There was Site Improve and Moncito and AudioEye and a few others. But after all of the analysis of what we really wanted to do and accomplish, Site Improve was the tool.
Well, and even with manual tools, you'll find early on, it is manual to go to each page and say, there's a missing alt tag. But you can often find things that are site-wide issues with like your headers, form tags, missing area labels.
There's this thing called policies.
And then once you fix that once, it's,
Oh my God, it's
yeah.
my savior. So we, even down to like silly things, I mean, it's not silly, but we have like 4 different versions of how people are putting in a phone number on the site. Some are using parentheses, some are using dots, some are using dashes. It's crazy. And so we put in a policy, so now it will scan the site and tell us all of the places where it's not conforming to our specific format. Yeah, it's super cool.
So I was afraid you were going to say DOJ wants you to use these specific
No, you basically, so you have a representative for your DOJ settlement, and you go find the tools that you're interested in, and you present them to them and say, can we use these tools? They look and evaluate them, and they come back and say yes. And they were fine with the Wave tool. All the tools that we were using for free, they were fine with. We just had to tell them, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it.
Yep.
Congratulations on that effort. How long is this?
Like the actual content audit has been since the beginning of the year, but like I said, just hitting that low-hanging fruit and things like that, we're able to knock down about 14,000 pages or remediate them. We're planning on being done June of 2020.
What we did, so after we got this big long list, I went back to the list of all the portals because we had knocked a few out, and I said, we really need benchmarks. So based on that level of effort matrix, which is based on analysis, like how many pages, how many accessibility errors, how many assets that, high value, high effort, high value, low effort, whatever it was, I chunked out all of the portals into like 3 or 6 month periods.
And just to give you an idea, this is our tracking sheet for all of our portals.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so at the top here, everything that we've done, things we're working on, and then at the bottom, things we haven't touched yet, because these are like high effort, nightmare, public works websites and stuff like
And
that.
there's another, is this the same one where it's like green, yellow, red?
Yeah, it's this. There's no color on
It's
this.
hard to see on the color, but yeah, so I had, what was it, August, September, October, no, it was July, August, September for the first chunk. October, November, December, there was a chunk before that in the beginning that we already finished and marked that off, so that was fine. And then the hardest ones are being done between June and, or January and June of next year.
And I print this off every Monday because we have a meeting with our manager, and we show them more green every time, a little bit more
Yeah.
yellow, a little, you know.
And you can see, like, here's the number, this is great.
Page start, page
Animal
ends.
shelter, number of pages, 694 pages at start, 83 at the end. 164 documents at the beginning, 11 at the end. 278 images, 32 at the end. So we track all of that.
And it helps you too. It's that kind of like reward, your biscuit.
Because anything you get rid of, you don't have to remediate.
So, but we're going to go ahead and wrap up now. We're a little bit over time. Does anybody mind if I take a quick picture of everybody? This is, I'm like, look, honey, look how many people I talked in front of. Awesome, thank you. But we do have some flash drives up here. Anybody that wants to grab one, it has a lot of these templates on there, or you can just format it and put other junk on there.
Yeah, so these drives have the scope of work template, the tracking sheet template, communications template, a whole bunch of other things. There's a bunch, and the presentation.
Thank you.